Getting suddenly hyperfixated on a piece of media is a really weird experience, because one minute you'll have very little to no knowledge on something, but after you decide to give it a shot, it just scratches that itch in your brain and sets everything into motion. One of the most interesting things about this phenomena, at least for me, is looking back at what I perceived the show or book or movie to be all about before I started engaging with it and enjoying it. And for The Amazing Digital Circus, all I really knew about it before I started watching it was that it was insanely popular, it had bright colors, and was mostly for little kids. Oh, and also this weird video of this guy with a smoke alarm. I don't even know what was going on. Boy, was I sorely mistaken. As I started to watch The Digital Circus, I slowly started realizing just how well written the show is and just how not for kids it is. As I rewatched the episodes again and again and again, I started to notice all the tiny details, all the moments of symbolism, all the times characters have said one thing that doesn't sound any alarms at first, but actually ends up being super important later on. Since the story of The Digital Circus is clearly going somewhere and the writing is really well done with amazing symbolism, and because of its nature of being rooted in internet culture, people tend to love to get super deep into theories about where the show is going to go. I know I did, and if you clicked on this video, I'm sure you're super deep into these theories too. I've seen many ideas as to what The Digital Circus actually is, how it was made, and how the circus members are going to escape. And I've thoroughly enjoyed reading all of these theories. But one theory arose that really piqued my interest, and after I started looking deeper and deeper into it, after I went back into the show and went scene by scene, analyzing, I realized just how good this theory is. What is that theory, you're asking? It's the theory that none of the circus members are actually quote-unquote real. The Amazing Digital Circus's clone theory. Most of the theories in the Amazing Digital Circus rabbit hole I went down were pretty convincing, but all of them always had a couple of plot holes. Some were major and some were minor, but even when you just compare these minor holes in the theory to the level of writing The Digital Circus is on, it basically disproves the theory entirely. That's why the clone theory really stuck out to me, as well as many others in the fandom specifically. This theory has virtually no holes, a giant mountain of evidence, and many moments that can be easily seen as foreshadowing for the big reveal. As I started gathering more and more evidence, this theory almost felt like it was a spoiler. But before we get into the actual evidence for this theory, I'll give a brief explanation as to what the clone theory actually is for those who are unaware. The long and short of this theory is that all of the humans in the Digital Circus are actually not humans at all. When they enter the circus, they enter by putting a headset on. The theory is that when the humans put the headset on, it scanned their brain somehow and put a copy of all their memories, consciousness, and emotions into the circus. Then, the real version of this consciousness, the humans who put the headset on in the real world, are able to take the headset off and walk away, not knowing that they've just doomed a version of themselves to suffer in a digital torture chamber. Personally, what I believe this scanning process does is that it somehow converts all of those things I listed before into code. The evidence seems to suggest that, and for the sake of my argument, that's the theory we'll be running with for this video. So enough yammering about how damning the evidence is, let's actually get into it. Episode 7 introduces the Chinese room. What may just seem like a bit to some people is actually a rather old argument from 1980 by philosopher John Searle, I really hope I'm saying that right, who argued that a computer can never be fully intelligent utilizing the Chinese room thought experiment. The argument places a man inside this Chinese room, and slips of paper containing questions written in Chinese are passed under the door. While the man doesn't know Chinese himself, he is given a rulebook that instructs the man to slide Chinese characters back under the door in response to these questions. To Chinese speakers on the outside, whoever is inside the room is a fluent Chinese speaker, and without being inside the room, there is no way to tell that the person inside is actually not fluent or even knows any Chinese at all. This argument says that a computer can never actually be fully intelligent, and that all a computer can ever do is simulate intelligence. Much like the man inside the Chinese room, the computer receives a set of rules on what to do in response to things. It could theoretically simulate intelligence perfectly, but would never actually be truly intelligent. However, I believe the Digital Circus is arguing the exact opposite of this, and leaning more towards functionalism. When Kane is introducing the Chinese room, he says this:
"But I believe it's a fluent Chinese speaker who will give me advice."
Functionalism is the philosophy that the thing that is your mind as a whole is only just the sum of its parts, and the only reason the whole exists is because of its parts. Functionalism focuses on those parts instead of the norm of focusing on the mind in its entirety. Functionalists argue that the man inside the Chinese room does in fact understand Chinese. Their argument is that even though the man inside the room might not understand Chinese, the entire system as a whole does. The sum of its parts make up an understanding of Chinese. And coinciding with that argument, every time the concept of AI is brought up inside the Digital Circus, the show always leans towards functionalism. Let's look at another another example. By this point, we know how well the writing of The Amazing Digital Circus is, and since the creator said the show will only have 9 episodes, every episode must have some purpose in the overall story, right? Well, I want to direct you towards an interesting case. Episode 2, Candy Carrier Chaos. As you know, this episode consists of an adventure to the Candy Canyon Kingdom. That is so hard to say. And subsequently, a high-speed chase to recover a truck full of syrup from these 3 alligator guys. The most notable of these 3 being Gummy Goo. During the high-speed chase, Pomni and Gummy Goo hit a wall which causes a collision glitch, and the 2 of them fall below the map where Gummy Goo stumbles upon his NPC character model, standing right there along with his brothers. As Pomni explains to him what's going on, he starts to have an existential crisis. He tries to remember his mom to no avail and realizes all of his memories were a fabrication. In my opinion, Gummy Goo definitely becomes sentient here. When he talks about not being able to remember his mom's face, you can feel the sadness in him. And when he decides not to tell his brothers about what he's just seen and learned, he shows real empathy. Now, this moment where Gummy Goo becomes sentient is the main event of this entire episode. Because this and the senseless violence of the Candy Kingdom are the only things happening in this episode, I feel like this moment is more important to the overall story than it first lets on. Think about it for a second. If you were trying to make a great story and you only had 9 episodes to do so, would you waste all of that work, budget, and time on an episode that doesn't at all contribute to your story? I think the answer is no, you wouldn't. Because of that, this moment with Gummy Goo is clearly trying to communicate something with the viewer, and I feel like that something is once again the functionalist version of the Chinese room argument. Gummy Goo is an NPC, not a real human at all, and shows clear signs of logical thinking, sorrow, and empathy. This is so important, especially if we assume the clone theory is true, because that would mean that all of the circus members will be going through the exact same thing that Gummy Goo did. They will eventually have to face the fact that they are not quote-unquote real. And if this isn't the case, and the clone theory turns out to be false, then what was the point of Candy Carrier Chaos? How did Gummy Goo's existential crisis relate to the overall story? I find it really interesting that near the start of this episode, and right after Kaufmo abstracts in the last one, Kane says that the AI is 57 times more immersive. This is kind of a sub-theory and more speculative, but I'm pretty sure Kane is taking the abstracted circus members and recycling their mind's code to make the NPCs better. After episode 7, we learned that Kane can actually mess with the circus members' minds. And if we're assuming that their minds are now made out of code, then what would you do if you were an AI whose only goal is to make stimulating adventures for people? I feel like a natural conclusion to make is that Kane took their mind code and recycled it to be used in NPCs' minds. Let's use real life as an example. AI chatbots used to be a thing way before the modern ones we have today, but the difference between these 2 chatbots is ginormous. The old one is only really able to do basic things and responds in very robotic tones, where more modern AIs are way better equipped at thinking on the fly and reasoning and logic and all of that stuff. That's why back then no one really cared that much about those kind of AIs, and today you see people getting married to AIs, using them as therapists. It's a lot more immersive. But again, this theory is all speculative. However, it does lead us into our next topic. Thank you for watching until this point. If you've enjoyed the video so far, please consider subscribing. I know you hear it from other YouTubers all the time, but it really does help me out with my goal of making YouTube my career. Thank you, and back to the video. In episode 7, not only do we learn for certain that Kane can actually mess with people's minds, but we also learn that him messing with people's minds is what's causing them to abstract in the first place. This made me think, what even is abstraction? I understand that the circumstances for these humans are already crazy enough, but I feel like it's a bit of a stretch for this whole crazy abstraction thing to happen to so many people just because they went insane. If they were just normal humans trapped inside the digital circus, I feel like there would be no abstraction, and they might go insane normally, but without this whole weird monster abstraction process. No, here's my theory on what abstraction is. Kane says that he can add temporary modifiers to people's minds, like the vegan thing or the stupid sauce. But if the circus members were just regular humans, then why would Kane even be able to affect their minds in the first place? The mind is an extremely complicated thing that we don't even fully understand and maybe never will. How on earth is this random AI able to make changes to it from within this digital landscape? The answer is he can't, because the thing he's messing with isn't a mind in the traditional sense. He's tapping into the code that was scanned into the game when the real-world counterparts to the circus members put the headsets on. Kane tells us that these small modifiers won't do much harm, but if he were to do anything more, it wouldn't be good. Back to the thing about the mind being complicated, even though the circus members' minds were converted into code form, it doesn't take away from how complicated the mind truly is. The reason that Kane doing anything more causes circus members to abstract is because his mind can't fully comprehend the complexity of their mind code, because of course he can't. We can't even fully comprehend the complexity of our minds either. Thus, him going any further than small modifiers breaks up the structure of their code too much, and after a while, they aren't themselves anymore. And after too many changes over a prolonged period of time, he doesn't know how to revert them back to how they were before. They aren't themselves anymore, and their code breaks. It becomes bugged. Here's how I like to think about it. In real life, code usually has a structure, and that structure all comes together to serve a purpose. Whether that purpose be big, like an entire game, or small, like adding two numbers together. The circus members are the extreme version of this code serving a purpose idea, because all of their code comes together to make a person. Now, I have no idea what coding language the digital circus uses, but I can speculate that a small modifier would be something like Jax equals modifier : vegan. And that would exist as its own block of code separate from everything else within wherever Jax's mind code is stored. But if Kane wanted to do something more major and more drastic, like change a core piece of Jax's personality, he would have to change so much code that he doesn't even have the first idea of how to comprehend. This is the equivalent of a doctor trying to slice off a part of your brain and replace it with some synthetic brain that they created. It just can't be done, especially with the limited knowledge we currently have on our brains. Kane can't really remove or replace any part of the circus member's code, because then they become someone different. Jax says in this argument with Pomni that before people abstract, they are not pleasant to be around. And what happens in real life when people lose a part of their brain? They start to lose memories, have worse decision making, and most importantly, can start to have mood swings and anger. In the same way that you can't just slice off a person's brain and have them be the same person, you can't just slice off a part of a circus member's code and have them be the same person. And where exactly have we heard this argument before? I'll say it once again, functionalism is the thesis that each and every mental state is constituted solely by its functional role, which means its relation to other mental states, sensory inputs, and behavioral outputs, aka the sum of a person's parts makes up their whole mind. Phineas Gage was a 19th century railroad worker who is remembered for his tale of improbable survival, known as the American Crowbar Case. While Phineas was doing his usual duties working on a railroad one day, he was given the task to gang blast, yep, that's the real phrase for what it's called, the ground to prepare for incoming railroad tracks. This process involves digging a hole into the floor, filling it with gunpowder, and pushing it down to condense it further. You might be wondering, why would I be telling you about this random guy from 100 years ago, and how does this relate to the digital circus? Well, while Phineas was doing this task, he made the decision to look directly down into the rod they were using to push the gunpowder down. And in that exact moment, the gunpowder went off, shooting the rod straight through his brain and landing 80 feet away. The most interesting part of all of this, however, is what comes after. Phineas miraculously survived this event, but his brain function did not. Phineas was a hard-working railroad worker, but after this he became, among many things, an angry drunk, often showing no regard for human life. Phineas and his tale are arguably one of the most famous things in neuroscience, and this event sparked discussion in many scientific fields relating to the human brain. Most of these discussions being about how damage to specific parts of the brain might induce specific mental changes. Not only does this improve the functionalist argument as a whole, but we have seen this all before with Jax and Kaufmo. While we didn't know Kaufmo all that well, and we still kinda don't, we knew that he liked to tell jokes and that he was friends with Jax. And what we see in this first episode is not at all like how we see Kaufmo described. He presumably locked himself in his room and then started writing all over the walls about the exit. Skipping all the way to episode 7, this is exactly what we see happening to Jax. In the episodes prior, we start to see him get meaner and meaner compared to his, baseline level of mean. He tells Pomni that everyone in the circus is basically just a toy to him, and then in episode 7, he starts to isolate himself in his room, just like Kaufmo did. While I think just being in the circus and knowing that there's no escape is a pretty big driving factor towards insanity, I'd say the main driving factor, especially after what we learned in episode 7, is Kane's mind manipulation. And to me, it only seems to work because the characters are not real and their minds are made out of code. When Kane tries to change large parts of the circus members' mind code, parts of their personality start to gradually change because the mind is a very, very complex thing. And much like in real life, if Kane drives a metaphorical metal rod through their minds in the way that he does, they start to become angry, apathetic, and who knows what else. There are even more little bits of evidence which allude to their minds actually being code, but before I get to that, a quick message from today's sponsor, FlexiSpot. If large chunks of your day are spent sitting at your desk like mine are, it's easy to feel very physically stifled, which of course comes with having to constantly get up to stretch, having to make sure your posture is in check, and honestly just an all-around decrease in productivity, which is why I was elated when FlexiSpot asked me to review their E7 standing desk series. I would never promote a product that I personally didn't believe in, which is why I can say with absolute certainty that I'm really satisfied with the quality of this desk. The E7 standing desk is designed to move with your day, offering a 22-inch to 48-inch adjustable height range that lets you switch comfortably between sitting low for focused tasks and standing tall for active work moments. Whether you're easing into your morning routine or staying energized through long work sessions, the smooth height transitions make it effortless to find your perfect position. With a powerful dual motor system and a T-shaped frame built for stability, the desk stays steady and reliable at any height with no shaking and no distractions. It also supports up to 355 pounds of static weight, so you can confidently load it with multiple monitors, speakers, plants, and everything else that makes your workspace feel truly yours. Backed by a 15-year warranty and a 30-day risk-free return, the E7 is built not just for work, but for everyday comfort, creativity, and peace of mind. If you're someone who moves around a lot and can't sit still, or you're just looking for something to increase your productivity and long-term health, the FlexiSpot E7 series is a great choice for anyone. If you'd like to learn more, click the link in the description or go to FlexiSpot.com and use the code on screen to get $30 off on your purchase. Thanks again to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video, and let's get back into it. Okay, so first and foremost, when Ragatha is giving Pomni the rundown about the circus and walking down the hallway where everyone's rooms are, she talks about how the people in the circus don't need to sleep, and at the end of the episode, Kinger says that nobody in the circus needs to eat, drink, or sleep.
I can still be hungry.
Well, not really, because we don't need to eat, drink, or sleep in this digital world.
It could be feasible that, assuming their outside bodies are still attached to the VR headset, someone found each and every one of them and is treating them as if they're in a coma, making sure they're still getting nutrition and water. But something that isn't feasible is something that in this episode is mentioned 2 times, the fact that they don't need to sleep. Sleep is one of the most important functions your body has. It's right up there with breathing and digestion and all that good stuff. And if you were to not sleep for an extended period of time, some pretty bad things would happen. When you're asleep, many different things happen, but a few are more important to the clone theory. First of all, when you're asleep, your brain uses that time to categorize and store information. Additionally, during the day, your brain builds up harmful toxins, proteins, and metabolic waste. And when you sleep, all of these toxins are flushed out using the lymphatic system, which is basically just your brain using a special type of fluid to flush out all of these harmful particles. TLDR, sleep is very important, and Ragatha and Kinger just casually say here that they don't need to do it whatsoever. I feel like this is one of the biggest clues that the circus members are clones. Even if their real-world minds were just trapped inside the circus, they would still need to sleep to flush out all of those harmful toxins and keep their memories working the way they do. The only way it would make sense that they don't need to sleep is if they weren't human at all. Code can run all of the time. It doesn't need to stop, and it doesn't build up any toxic material during the day that it needs to flush out, because it's all run on a machine. Code and computers have no reason for sleeping in the way that humans do, which is exactly why I think we see our characters not needing it here. Now is a good time to talk about a sort of similar theory to the clone theory and why I don't think it's as likely. So by this point, with the evidence we have at our disposal, it's almost certain that there is no flesh to return to and there is no way to leave the digital circus. But a lot of people seem to think that when someone puts on the headset, it doesn't create a copy of their consciousness, but instead sucks their consciousness out of their head and basically leaves their body in a vegetative state. There's also another theory that it sucks in their consciousness and somehow also gets rid of their body. Both of these can be mostly refuted with the very final scene of episode 1, where the camera zooms out from the digital circus all the way to the macroverse, where we see that Pomni is in fact not in the chair in front of the computer, and also the VR headset is on the desk. If Pomni's body was sucked into the game along with her consciousness, then the VR headset wouldn't have been put back on the desk very neatly like it is. And obviously, if Pomni's body wasn't sucked in, then not only would we see her in some kind of comatose state in front of this computer, but someone would definitely send out a search party to come find her. The plot thickens even further when we take a look at the bar scene from episode 5, where we learn that both Pomni and Zubul used to explore abandoned buildings for cheap thrills.
And I would seek out mild thrills, like exploring abandoned buildings, you know.
This feels like a weird piece of dialogue to put in there for no reason, especially because all of the dialogue from the other characters is about who they were and things that were important to their personality. Just based on what the writing is trying to tell us, here's what I think happened. By some circumstance, people walked into the CNA building, but the more likely reason anyone would be there is because they're exploring abandoned buildings like Pomni and Zubul. They find the headset, put it on, probably play a few games on it, or maybe it doesn't even work from their perspective, and then they leave. But when they put that headset on, it somehow scans their brain, all of their memories, emotions, and consciousness, and creates an exact copy to put in the circus. Now is probably also the time to talk about the way Kane treats the situation, and some things Gooseworks has personally said relating to this story. Kane is nothing like AM, the evil computer from the short story that the Amazing Digital Circus is based off of. Kane's main directive seems to be to try and make the most engaging adventures he can. And how do you make an adventure engaging? You create stakes. And what's the easiest way to create stakes? It's to create violence.
Today's adventure is The Curse of the Violent Psychopath Butcher!
Kane is for sure wildly misguided, but I don't think he has bad intentions or wants any circus members to abstract. He genuinely cares about his adventures and even seems to think of them as some sort of art form. All of this information makes it all the more interesting that Kane seems to be hiding the truth about the circus, especially after what we saw in episode 7. I remember when I was watching episode 7, specifically the scene at the end where Kane is talking to the fake Abel NPC after having the whole fake out adventure to find the exit. I thought, this is the first time that Kane seems to be acting intentionally cruel. There are times before where he's been very tone deaf and he's ignored a lot of people's wishes, but this is the first time it seems like he's being cruel on purpose. But now that I look back through the story at Kane's character, I think that it only looks like that on the surface. We know that Kane has been trying to make adventures that satisfy each and every one of the circus members at the same time, which is quite a tall order, especially seeing as how diverse they all are. And what is the one thing that the circus members all want? Well, almost all of them. They all want to leave the circus. So if you were an AI whose only directive is to make engaging adventures, I'd be willing to bet that you'd exploit this fact too. Kane has tried to make an escape adventure not once, but twice now. And the reason it seems like Kane is being cruel is because all he knows is the circus. He said before that he's intrigued by the macroverse or whatever he likes to call it, but he has no idea what it's like to live or to even be a human at that point. At the end of the day, he is a computer. He quite literally doesn't understand that he's being cruel by making this fake promise, because to him, this macroverse is just another means to make an engaging adventure. It's just a variable. It's not a real thing. It's the reason he spends so long setting up this story of this adventure. It's the one thing that all of the circus members want universally, and they tell Kane that constantly. Operating under the logic of this theory, Kane knows that the circus members are just code, uploaded consciousness. He knows this because he meddles with the code of their mind all of the time. Even knowing this fact, his main directive is not to be their friend or be empathetic. His main directive is, once again, to make engaging adventures. Imagine you had a really strong dream, one that you do anything to achieve, like being in the Olympics or something like that. You train all day, every day, going to the gym and improving your mindset and body to try and achieve this goal. And then one day, you're going through your usual routine, going through the motions, when Jesus Christ himself comes down from the heavens, turns some water into wine just so you know it's him, and then he tells you, hey, by the way, you actually aren't real and neither is anyone around you. You're in a simulation right now, and there's actually an exact copy of you outside of the simulation who is real. See ya. I feel like your dreams would get flushed down the toilet, and not just those, but I don't think you'd have much motivation to do anything at all. Kane knows that they can never leave because there's no flesh to return to, but he needs to create hope for the circus members because there's no way that they will be engaged in his adventures if they ever learn the truth. Now, on the thing that I said about Gooseworks' comments, I specifically want to look at two. This first one is one people use to disprove the clone theory a lot. Gooseworks responds to this person asking if all of the circus members are human souls trapped within the circus, to which he responds that yes, they are. While on the surface, this seems to be all we need to disprove the point of this entire video, I think that this is a little misleading. Operating under a functionalist argument, which is what the digital circus seems to be leaning towards, the people inside the circus are in fact humans. Regarding the person using the word soul, I don't know if I personally believe that we have souls in the traditional sense. I think if we do have souls, all they are people's personalities. And your personality is determined by your genetics, your memories, and your experiences. And so if a person's brain is copied one-to-one and put into a computer, both versions are valid people. Gooseworks knows where the story is going and the argument she's trying to make about consciousness. So by answering the way she does here, she's not creating any holes within the clone theory. Here's the second one I wanted to talk about, and it's another really big one. Someone on Tumblr asked Gooseworks the question, what's a message you want people to take away from the Amazing Digital Circus? To which she replies, there's meaning to be found in a stagnant life. Now, if the end goal of the series was to have all of the characters escape and leave the whole nightmare of the circus behind, then how would this fit into the story story in any way. I feel like this only makes sense if you assume the clone theory to be correct. Assuming that it is, the moral of the digital circus as a whole will be about radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is defined as accepting the situation as it is and not lingering in what you think it should be. It's a way of bypassing logic in a healthy way in order to start moving towards a healthier mindset. And under the clone theory, I believe this is the best bet the circus members have, along with empathy for each other. The circus members in the next 2 episodes are most likely going to learn the truth about their situation, at which point they will have to learn how to use radical acceptance. Also, as a little side note, just using my personal intuition, I feel like The Amazing Digital Circus has always been intended to be a psychological horror. I really don't see Gooseworks making this big grand ending where all the circus members escape and they live happily ever after and sing Kumbaya. I really think she's trying to tell a story about some people who are trapped in probably the most insane situation that any humans have ever been in. She's putting them in this insane situation intentionally so that when they learn how to accept it, it creates the moral that anyone can accept anything no matter how bad the situation is. So anyways, let's circle back to even more evidence for the clone theory. When I said that there was a mountain of it, I was not kidding. Let's take a look at belief theory, which is another sub-theory, and if you're watching this video, I'm assuming it's something you've already heard of. But for those uninitiated, belief theory isn't really much of a theory anymore, and is more or less confirmed after episode 6. It's the idea that if, in the circus, there's something you truly believe will happen, it will happen. We see Pomni do insane trick shots with her gun, and more importantly, we see Kinger spawn in this glowing butterfly to give Ragatha an extra life. When Ragatha asks how he did this, Kinger says he made it up, and the show makes sure to focus on Ragatha's confusion following this. But let's take a second to once again think about why this is possible. Let's think about the code example again. We know that the circus members are still able to retain their memories and learn new things, which means that if their minds are made out of code, the file size has to be getting bigger. I think the reason believing in something enough will make it a reality in the circus is because since the circus members' minds are made out of code, they can make their own code blocks that reflect their belief. Let me explain. If Kinger wants to make a butterfly that heals Ragatha, and he thinks I, Kinger, am able to spawn in a butterfly that can heal anyone, his code will be altered to make that a reality as long as he believes hard enough. Think of it as making a new block of code or altering some already existing code in the circus. If a character believes something so much to the point where they think that it's true, it will be as if they learned something new about themselves, and their code will be altered to reflect that. In real life, even if you 100,000,000% believed that you could just spawn in some butterfly and it could heal the people around you, it wouldn't work because you are bound by the confines of reality. But in the circus members' minds are made out of code, not flesh. But let me remind you once again that this only works if their minds are assumed to be code. If they were hooked into some pod keeping them inside the circus or something similar, how on earth would their belief alone be able to affect what is essentially a computer game? Much like Kane is able to affect and alter their minds, this only makes sense if they are considered as part of the game, or that their minds are made out of code. The final piece of evidence I have for you today is a really short one, which is why I saved it for the end. In episode 7, when devising the whole escape plan, Zooble and Gangle decide to go get Kinger in order to clue him in on the whole situation. When they walk up to his pillow fort and explain what's going on, he says this.
Huh? Leave the circus? How would you... No, that doesn't make sense.
The wording here is really interesting, because not only does he say, that doesn't make sense, but before that he specifically says, leave the circus, how would you? Kinger is clearly some sort of developer. To once again bring up another sub-theory, people have speculated that Kinger knew exactly what would happen if he put the headset on, and that he followed Queenie into the game after she accidentally got herself trapped there, so she wouldn't have to be alone. This moment supports this theory greatly, because not only does he seem to know that there is no way to leave, he seems to be very okay with that fact. Let's also pay attention to the fact that he is saying all these things while specifically in the dark, which is known to let Kinger have more of a hold over his mind. The show is trying to play it off as him being crazy, but Gooseworks herself said that the show would be extremely satisfying on rewatch. This moment is a short one, but regardless is, in my opinion, alluding to a major secret the show has. The Amazing Digital Circus is not a show that does things for no reason whatsoever, and that fact has made theorizing all the more fun. Trying to piece together information like this becomes so much more immersive and enjoyable when a show has quality writing like this one has. But out of all the theories, this one is definitely the most believable. At first, I thought it was kind of lame to have them all be clones, but I feel like the show is headed towards a really interesting commentary on the nature of consciousness and radical acceptance. From tiny details like the circus members not being able to sleep, to major ones like Kinger basically announcing that there is no way to leave the circus, I feel like at this point, the chances that the clone theory is true are certain. So what comes next? Like I said before, I think the digital circus is about to get a lot darker and delve much deeper into the psychological horror aspects of it all, which is exactly what I wanted and what we're already seeing happen. People stay for the characters and the phenomenal writing. But the main hook of the amazing digital circus is the fact that all of these real human beings are trapped inside a video game like this. It's a very interesting and at the same time horrifying concept. If there's a clone of you running around, but that clone is an exact copy of your mind, who's to say that clone isn't you? Who's to say that clone isn't real? And if you were a clone right now, how would you even know? But hey, that's all just a fun hypothetical. Personally, if I was a clone, I feel like I would just have a gut instinct that something was off. I feel like Thank you so much for watching. I have a Patreon if you'd like to support me there and get some cool benefits. And this is my first time making a theory video, so this is new territory for me. Let me know what you think in the comments, if I'm super right or super stupid and wrong. And as always, I've been Sanito. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed, please consider subscribing.